How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I know we're going to get into the topic
Okay.
in a second, but before we start, I just want to let people know, kind of remind them that if they've enjoyed what they've heard or watched, depending on what media they're tuning in, to make sure to please if it's on YouTube, press that subscribe button. If it's on iTunes or Spotify or wherever the hell you get your podcasts.
Wherever you find it.
Yeah, exactly. Please make sure that you're following. If you like it, give us feedback. We love feedback, and hopefully give us a 5-star rating. And where can people find us again?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Soon.
Okay. But for now, where can they find us?
Where can they find us? Yeah. They can find us on Facebook.
Yeah.
They can find us on Instagram.
Yeah.
And soon when they'll find us everywhere.
Everywhere.
Like YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. So
we will be everywhere.
Yeah. So everything's Kings of Chaos at all those sites, except for Instagram, kings.of.chaos.podcast. But everything else is just Kings of Chaos. So Facebook, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So
we look forward to seeing you following us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tonight's episode.
Yes.
All right.
Tell us about it.
We are going to be discussing Are Kids of Divorce More Resilient? And it's titled, based on a Pat Benatar song, Hell is for Children.
So I've got a question. Last couple episodes, right, we've talked about dating.
Mm-hmm.
How does this tie in with the whole theme of chaos and the whole idea of self-development, personal growth? Because again, we don't want people to think we're only talking about dating and relationships. There's more to it.
We talk about self-development too.
Yeah.
So part of this would be, again, you go back to attachment theory, where you want to talk about, how different people grow up in different ways and see the world differently. There's lots of different theories out there that we talk about. That's just one of them.
Yeah. Wounded inner child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for this standpoint, I don't even know if we have to go there into the psychology of it.
No, I don't
there's
think so.
Statistics that we can discuss for sure.
Big time. Big time.
So let's talk about children. I think the best way to look at it is children of high conflict divorces.
Okay.
And they are what I like to call the children of children, two parents that can't really work it out and think of their kids first. So as a former educator, you would have seen a lot of kids in this predicament.
Yep.
What would you see out of those kids?
It depends. Like, it really depends, to be quite honest. You can't generalize. Context makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at, is the divorce amicable?
Mm-hmm.
Is there at least one parent who is incredibly supportive and adult?
Mm-hmm.
Are the parents using the children? And I'm talking about from personal experience as well, where I've seen, are the parents using the child as a pawn or in a game of tug of war?
Oh, wow.
Right? Which is sad to see. But so there's so many different factors to consider that I don't think it's as easy to say, what do I notice?
Let's list off some Government of Canada stats. So
Okay.
They say on average, children of divorce,
Yep.
you will see poor grades.
Yep.
Again, as an educator, you can tell me if this is true. Poor grades, worse conduct, poor relationships with their peers,
Yep.
lower self-esteem, lower social competence, slower psychological development, and often they do not reach their full potential, which reminds me of all my old report cards. Adam has not met his potential yet.
Again, I think it varies. Academically, I've seen the whole spectrum. Okay.
What about in your office, not academically, behaviorally?
Behavioral? No. I can think of many children of divorce where they're not in the office, or if they were in the office, it's not necessarily because of behavioral issue. They just need to talk about something, right? Because I think there's also a misconception of office, at least in the world I lived in.
Yeah.
Office is synonymous with behavioral issues.
Okay.
And again, that was definitely the old school philosophy. For me, the office is supposed to be a safe place where it's just an opportunity to take a needed break. Sometimes it would be for behavioral reasons. Sometimes just students want to come down and chat. I had an open door policy. So I would have students coming down just wanting to talk hockey or let me know how their dance recital went, which I thought was great. But look, off the top of my head, I can't say that, yes, I saw significantly higher percentages or a significant difference from students whose parents were together. Because in a lot of cases, you may have people who are together
Mhm.
and they're staying together for the kids.
Yeah. Oh,
And
we
it
can get
is
into that
right.
after. That's
And right.
entirely different. Yeah,
And right there, it doesn't mean that's a safe or a healthy home environment either.
definitely not.
Right. So there's so much more to it when we talk about this.
Mhm.
The other thing that really stands out, you talked about, I guess, the social or the emotional impact.
Mhm.
And again, I think that one is, we're dealing with a very, very different time.
Okay.
Okay. And so from what I've seen, and again, I'm talking about both personally and professionally,
Mhm.
talking to family, talking to friends, again, my previous work environment, times have really changed. So I think children and teens in general today, there's more social and emotional issues going on.
I would say too, in a lot of divorces now, if we're talking about today,
Yeah.
although people would disagree with me, but as someone who was a former dad blogger and would meet a lot of men or women talking about their ex-husbands and things like that, would say that their ex-husbands actually were great fathers. They weren't great partners, but they were 50-50. So the men were doing just as much as the women. So as an example with my kids, I'll go into this in a minute, where I was, one of those kids that felt abandoned, often, left behind
Yeah.
because during the divorce, that doesn't happen anymore with good parents.
With,
With good parents, I will say that. If it's 50-50 and you have two conscientious parents, my kids have never waited once for me to get, my daughter thinks in her head that she's waiting when she waits 2 minutes, but she doesn't know what it's like to wait for 3 hours thinking someone's coming to pick you up and doesn't
right.
actually pick you up. So, but we're really talking about the contentious divorce where two parents really don't get along and they don't mind saying negative things about the other parent in front of their kids and all that. Have you ever seen extreme cases like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk more, I'm going to kind of remove the educational sphere,
Mm-hmm.
but even again, my personal
Mm-hmm.
world, I've seen things with dads who have no business being dads. Toxic individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not all of them.
You've seen toxic mothers too,
I've
I'm
seen
sure.
toxic mothers too, but I've definitely toxic dads. But then I've seen dads who are phenomenal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, it's I'm talking generalities. I don't want to single anyone out, but I've seen phenomenal single dads as well, who could be awarded for Dad of the Year. I know cases even where it's the dads who have ended up with the custody,
Yeah,
right? And are
that is definitely
incredible.
changing too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So again, I don't want to generalize. I've seen it all, but it's yeah, I can see where what when with these statistics, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
love to know more about it because for me there's so much more to it, like I mentioned at the
Yeah.
start. And without breaking it down as just a general, statistic, when I get numbers, I like to delve deep into things. I like really to kind of de-aggregate data. That's
Yeah.
something I used to do, and really try and dig down levels to see where all this is coming from and see if there's a more specific pattern than generalized
We can certainly
information.
post a lot of those stats
Yeah.
when we post it on Spotify, YouTube, all those
Yeah,
sites, so that
even on
people can read
even
a
on
lot of
even
the
on
studies that
Facebook.
we
Yeah,
read quickly. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Um, yeah, so you're talking about today. I kind of wanted to go back because I am the child of divorce. I don't say child, but the third one was much later in my life, but at least twice over as a child. So
Okay,
2.5 and 12 are
okay,
the two times when my mother got divorced. So if I go back and I look at my mother and my father, uh, things that kind of happened to me that definitely wouldn't fly today.
okay.
So, and you talk about, you were talking about where this comes from and let's go, you're talking about attachment issues
Yeah,
and I moved backwards. I'm going to get yelled at. Um, so we're talking about attachment issues, right? Part of attachment is, let's say, anxious.
yeah.
So abandonment issues as a specific topic. Where do those come from? So let's talk about some of the disadvantages that happen to kids. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen with parents that are together, but I'm saying, when you have two parents fighting over, let's say, where a kid's supposed to go to an after school program,
Yeah.
and then one parent wants the kid to go a certain place, another parent wants them to go to another place. In my case, my mother wanted me to go somewhere where I could walk across the street from my house and go. My dad had a different idea. He wanted me to go further. And in his mind, and this, keep in mind, this is like the early 80s, he said he wouldn't even come pick me up afterwards. And it was too far away from my house. And my mother didn't have time to do it. So he was supposed to send a cab for me back in the day. How often do you think that cab showed up at 9 o'clock at night when I was supposed to be picked up?
I'm guessing probably not too often.
Like 1 out of 10
Wow.
without me having to call. Now,
Wow.
we're talking about disadvantages, but is a disadvantage also an advantage? So you're teaching a kid that he has to kind of look out for himself.
Yeah.
And there was a police station across the street. I had no problem walking in a police station and asking them to use the phone. If that were today and I walked across the street to a police station and asked, and they listened to my conversation, would my dad still have fared as well?
No, that would probably be a CAS call at that point.
Yeah. But back, in the early 80s, that was still acceptable. And I would call and you'd have to call 2 or 3 times because remember, there's no cell phones.
Yeah.
And I would have to be the one to make sure that that cab came to pick me up. So a lot of my friends wouldn't have had to go through that, but I did. Does that help me later on in life? Probably. So is it really a disadvantage? Same thing, I would say, most of my friends when my parents, well, later on, my mother's second divorce, when my parents got divorced, I had to learn to get home from that school. We were much further away at that point. I had to walk probably 12 blocks out to get a bus, then take the bus for 20 minutes, then walk in another 12 blocks to get to the house. Which was a different experience for me than the way I'd grown up to that point.
Yeah.
How did I get smarter as I got older, though, in order to get home? So that was me probably grade 6 to 8. By grade 9, now I'm in high school with my older brothers. What was the smart way I figured out to get home? Well, there were a lot of girls that liked my older brothers, and they would ask me, like, how's your brother doing? I'm like, I don't know. Do you want to come see him? He's home, even though I knew he wasn't home, and I would get a lift home every day by a different girl.
Nice.
So there's a resiliency, I would say, even with certain disadvantages. Now, you're putting roadblocks in front of these kids, and you're still doing it today. But how are these kids figuring out their world in a better way when, let's say, mom has to work more now because they're divorced. They don't see dad as often. In those disadvantages, can you turn the negative into a positive?
I think most definitely. I think, look, I was just reading an anecdote is part of a book that I'm reading right now. And I've referenced it before, but Atomic Habits, right? And it's all about mindset with things and motivation. And James Clear, the author, talks about one anecdote where there's an individual who, I can't remember if they were in an accident, but required a wheelchair.
Okay.
And a lot of people were like, oh, I guess you're at a significant disadvantage, right? You need a wheelchair to get around.
Yeah.
That individual's attitude was, no, I'm an advantage. That wheelchair allows me to get out of bed and be productive every day. Mindset and perspective is everything. And you're right. So what happens really, really quickly is people see something and right away, everything becomes a label, right? It's a disadvantage. It's a negative. It's harmful versus this allows for growth. It allows for resilience, which is sorely lacking in this day and age. It allows for independence, which is sorely lacking. It allows for problem solving. I think you know the trend where I'm going with this one.
I totally know
right?
the trend where you're going with this one.
And so in that case, it develops a lot of really important life skills. So is it a disadvantage? Not necessarily. I could ask the same question. Okay, so people, again, two people stay together. Toxic household, fighting every day. You hear swearing, you hear negative talk towards each other.
Kids trying to sleep, they hear their parents like bloody murder. Yeah.
But hey, the parents are staying together. Advantage or disadvantage?
Disadvantage.
I think so.
You're doing a lot more damage to your kids by staying together as opposed to being apart. However, even if you're apart, if that continues and the two people don't learn from it, that damage is still going. So we'll get into that at the end because I think we have stats on that says which one's better or which one's worse.
And that goes back to the idea of, in some cases, it's children parenting children. And we don't mean children in terms of age, but we mean in terms of, have they really grown up? Have they matured? And are they still basing their behaviors on all kinds of past experience and past traumas and stuff?
I think it's a little bit different now for kids of divorce than it was then. I think divorce now you might have one parent that definitely picks up more slack, even though you did then,
Yeah,
but even more so, right? Parents are much more conscientious about their kids,
absolutely.
making sure they don't go through the same things that they went through when they were kids. The other thing is too, is a lot of people repeat the same patterns that their parents had. So you have to look at that. It's like, if you have a parent that was divorced several times, could that happen to you too? You may certainly repeat that pattern. And, so now you have to look at it happened. And now my kids are going through a similar situation that I went through. But do you have kind of like a better sense of humor about it than you might have when you were a kid, and how
Yeah,
you treat your kids differently? So even if your kids are going through a conscientious situation, you said there might be one better parent who's able to deal with that. Um, the kids are much stronger now, right? I will use my kids as an example. There's one thing about my son, and this is even in dating when I've dated different people, and that's a different part of being divorced, where, now one or both of your parents are dating other people, and now they have to be accepting of your kids too in the way that they are. My son is one of those kids that he just has a mind of his own.
okay.
But in having a mind of his own, he is perfectly happy um, to do things that other kids wouldn't do. He's unafraid to go on stage in front of hundreds of people. When he plays a sport, he's relentless in trying to learn it. But that translates too into his behavior at home.
Right.
He likes to be the center of attention. He's a little bit stubborn, but do you try to take that out of your kid when you know you were the kind of kid with parents and going through a contentious divorce where they're fighting against each other, and it's almost taking away from your personality, your self-esteem, all that? Do you want to take that out of your kid? So I find the second generation even stronger
Yeah.
because they have the parent that's not going to try to take that out of them.
I think there's a couple things with that too. I think part of it is it's reframing things first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear things like stubborn,
Mm-hmm. Which I've
um,
been called.
right, or is it persistent?
Yeah,
Right.
it's
Right.
terminology. Yeah,
Right. Semantics are huge.
yeah.
The other thing is, do you want a child who is passive and going to be walked on by everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want a child to be raising a child? I'm not talking about a bully. I'm not talking about someone who just thinks that, their shit doesn't stink and the world revolves around them. But I'm
No,
talking about a child
it's
who
just sure in
is
themselves.
confident, has some independence. I'd much rather have that than a child who's going to be walked on by everybody. I think that's huge. And
But
so again, if some of these skills are being developed because because
Mhm.
of the situation, in some ways that maybe better prepares people for the realities of life as well. Because there's always going to be people who
But what makes that kid feel so confident?
that's going to come from the parent or parents.
Yeah.
That's going to be huge.
Again, at least one parent
Yeah,
has to instill that in them. And if you
that
have
that's
both
huge.
parents instilling that in you, because you may be contentious with
Yeah.
each other, but you're on the same page for the kids, then I think that makes it better for the kids.
And then if that's amplified by other adults,
Mhm.
so other family members, uh, educators when they go to school, if they're in other programs, so camp counselors or they play hockey or dance, like those type of
Yeah.
trusted adults, if that is amplified and magnified by that,
Mhm.
I think that adds to it as well. Because if
Extended family is a big help in this sense. Yeah.
absolutely, if the perception is right away, oh, that child's stubborn, that child's difficult,
Hmm.
you've already labeled them.
Hmm.
So already they're starting at a place behind other people, right? They already have kind of this blemish or this
Stubborn
mark
to
against them,
whom? Yeah.
right? And what makes someone stubborn? Again, some people, and I'm talking about adults now,
Mhm.
they want everything to be so perfect and they're so sensitive with everything
Well,
that the
stubbornness
slightest
is a
bit,
defense mechanism, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
but at the same
It's also
time,
passed down from
right, but
generations.
at the same time, it's up to us as adults to understand the root of things and where it's coming from
Mhm.
versus just making assumptions or generalizations or labeling.
Yeah.
Dig deep, understand, take some time to figure it out, and then
Mhm.
take time to form connections and figure out how to rework that in a positive way.
Mhm.
It's pretty simple.
It's pretty simple. Look, when I look at my son and my daughter as well, but when I look at my son specifically, I look at all the things that he does that I had to learn the hard way
Right.
of, how to just feel comfortable in my skin. He is always himself. Um, But again, I've been lucky enough to have two parents, even though, I would say when we got separated, it wasn't great in the beginning,
Yeah.
but we were smart enough to look, we don't want to do any damage to our kids. So we're going to do the best that we can for them. But if I go back, to the things that I had to do back in the day, I think kids even get a little bit more parental guidance, just again, because if they either had divorced parents or they had parents that came from uh, two healthy parents,
Yeah.
let's say two secure parents, then that certainly helps those kids now. But if I go back to my generation, the things that I had to do, because in that generation, you know, parents would get divorced, the mom hadn't worked. Now she's got to go out to work. Now the kids are raising themselves.
Hmm.
I don't find that as much in this generation as we did in the last generation. I'm just waiting.
No, 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 no. When you take a look, things are so different as it is.
Mhm.
I find in some ways, though, parents today, in many cases, may be overprotective, too overprotective.
That is a big problem.
Okay.
That too.
I,
We
I
had more freedom though when we
yeah.
were
Well, I was
younger
gonna say,
to begin with.
go out, right? Play hockey on the street till it
Mhm.
got dark. No one thought twice about that,
Yeah.
right? Now, well, now not only is no one play hockey on the street, they're attached to their video games the whole night anyhow.
Yeah.
But when you talk about even being overprotective, right? I used to get calls, not me directly, but school get calls. It's -1 out.
Yeah.
Are the kids going outside today? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Canada.
Yeah.
It's -1.
It'll actually be hot in a couple hours.
Right?
Yeah.
The children love it. We're not talking -101, we're talking -1.
I'm wondering though, just even from my childhood, and let's talk about my last year of high school. I
Okay.
got to live alone in the house with my brother. So, and this is after years of another one of my brothers teaching me how to cook.
Okay.
We taught each other, well, he taught me how to cook because he actually wanted to keep the money my mom gave him and put it in his own pocket. So he'd just make whatever was in the house so he'd keep the money. But he taught me how to cook.
Some entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
He was very smart.
Yeah.
Food was still good, but then he'd go get himself wings after he made me some kind of pasta. But then, after learning all those things on our own, and definitely being self-sufficient, while we had to be because she was working, then there came a time in my last year of high school where my second eldest brother and I lived in the house on our own. We did the grocery shopping. We made sure the house was clean. Could you imagine a kid in this day and age being left
No.
in the house by themselves? Let's say 16 or 17.
No. No. And again, I find that part of it is, I don't know what it is. You take a look, whether it's just change in parenting, whether it's change in society, but even that sense of responsibility, it's lacking.
Yeah.
I do find it's lacking. The ability to do chores on your own,
Mhm.
right? Ability, responsibility to get schoolwork done without the parent checking in to see, is it done?
Yeah.
Right?
We
Again,
do a lot more things for our kids in this era than
but
past eras.
almost too much in some ways.
Mhm.
And that can be worrisome because then you get out to the real world.
Mhm.
How do you survive out there? I'm not saying you can't, but there's a question like, what's it going to look like 20 years from now?
Well, I mean, we're talking about kids from divorce and resiliency, but
Yeah.
even if you just think of it in different ways, look at some kids today, and you walk into a store.
Yeah.
Let's say you walk into a coffee shop and you give them a certain. How often do people still use money anymore? But let's say you give them money and they're supposed to give you change back.
Oh boy.
Can they do it without a calculator?
No.
Because they weren't raised to do it without a calculator. So imagine me, I'm in grade 7 or 8, and my mother gave me money as an allowance to get home. Instead of getting tokens, I would use that food to, get lunch there off like some food truck that would show up because all my friends were. But then at the end of the day, I'd have no change to get home. So then I was scrounging for change. I had to do that math in my head to be able to figure out how to get home. So imagine if I couldn't do that.
Oh,
I would have never gotten home.
not at all.
Right? So, I mean, but that's the part of things that I had to go through as a kid to figure things out for myself. Now, I don't know if that's any different than people whose parents were together because I don't know the difference.
Right. I mean, I remember where we would have still gotten an allowance. And again, if we wanted to go buy something, so on and so forth, but it might not be so much about getting home, right? There's always, I remember with me, there's always, wasn't my parents, one of my grandparents, there's always someone to be able to get us, or there's always someone when we came home.
My grandmother did often help
Yeah.
fill in for my mother and do certain things for
Yeah.
us. Yes.
So there was definitely that. What I'm curious about, though, from your experiences is how do you think that shaped you to the person you are today?
I mean, again, I have three older brothers.
Yeah.
I think it's family placement too, where it happens.
Okay.
So let's see if you want to talk attachment theory. Let's
Yeah.
say one of my brothers ends up being secure, one ends up being avoidant, the other two end up being anxious or avoidant, depending on their relationships as they get older. That can be a detriment to you. So there's a disadvantage there of what
Okay.
we were talking about. But in terms of things that you can do as you get older, the resiliency that I have, or just even the street smarts that came out of it. As I get older and my dad, the cab wasn't showing up, I was one of those kids who would do interesting things like try to figure out the best way to get there and get home by getting a lift from someone. I didn't just pick someone with one kid. I picked someone who had 8 kids in a minivan because I knew they wouldn't care if they had an extra kid.
Right.
Right. But I was doing that calculation in my head. Right. No one taught me that. I had
Yep.
to figure that out on my own. So it's things like that that almost you're kind of forcing the kid to learn. How does that help me in my later life? In so many different ways. Because my problem solving is a lot better. Is it better in relationships? Maybe not. But from a work standpoint, it certainly helps me on a regular basis. I again think a lot of kids from divorce, and this is actually a big problem, but it does serve them well in some ways. They end up in what I call survival mode.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time, their whole lives, in a certain kind of survival mode. And this isn't even written down here, but that becomes a disadvantage to them for sure. Because they always feel like they have to survive, it stops them from taking certain chances or doing other things, even though on a regular basis they're able to do things that other people aren't able to do. But in their mind, it's almost like creates its own little prison because you can't escape that mindset.
And do you think that comes from fear, anxiety, just the uncertainty, the instability in the past?
I think
Combination?
it's all of the above. I'll give a good example of this.
Okay.
So, and I was the kid that used to go grocery shopping with my mother, and there was one time we were grocery shopping and she was going through the divorce, hadn't been finalized yet. We had moved from one house into a smaller house. We didn't like the smaller house. So there's always that step. So you feel at a disadvantage because your self-esteem drops
Right.
from one big house to a lower big.
Yep.
So you almost feel lesser than your friends, even though you shouldn't. But it's just because of the move. Now you're not in the same area. It's from the socioeconomic standpoint, you feel different. So imagine that I'm grocery shopping with her, and my mother, a very stoic person, but we were in the grocery store, and this is back when you gave checks. That's how long ago this is. So
At least it wasn't stone tablets.
no.
No.
So stone tablets would be awesome.
Like rocks for
Chip
currency,
into
right?
them, like
Exactly.
chip into the amount that you want.
I owe you.
Yes. So no, she wrote a check, and you used to have to call the bank, and they called the bank, and they said she didn't have enough funds in there. Now she knew she did, but because of everything else that she was going through, just the fact that this happened in that moment, it's like breakdown.
Yeah.
And you're the kid sitting there with her. I'm the youngest. So even the way you think about money from going through that situation is very different, because I'll always remember that moment when she did that. So it pops into my head. So that can change you greatly, just one moment. And it's so simple. So that's just one great example of the ways it affects you as you get older. And you have to work on it. But again, it's one single moment that you remember forever.
But that's all it takes, right? All it takes is that one experience, that one moment, that one memory.
And you can have all the money in the world. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the way we're wired, and again, I'm diverging a little bit, but the way we're wired, you can have all these amazing events that go on, but the way the brain processes our survival instincts, that's what we remember, are those traumatic moments, those negative experiences. or even things that might not be as negative as we think, but things that we process at the time as being harmful or
Yeah.
negative. And it's
Your
a survival instinct.
subconscious always thinks of a way to protect you, and
Absolutely.
it's always looking for the negatives, never looking for the positives. And it's always translating into that, like, beware, 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 beware.
And it goes back to prehistoric times. I mean, that's what it comes down to when you're out back in the day walking around with your club and you got to worry about the saber-toothed tiger, right? Jumping out at you from any possible
Yeah.
area.
And it's triggering you.
And even though we have all the amenities and all the luxuries and everything else now,
Hmm.
at the heart of the way we're wired as people in terms of brain function, that's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Are there short-term benefits for a kid to go through divorce that you can see? I have a list, but what can you think of?
It can teach things such as empathy,
Hmm.
understanding, depending on how they handle it and depending on the support base. Again, we talked about resilience.
Hmm.
It may help with greater self-awareness.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, Even things, believe it or not, I think often, especially when you see kids who get a little bit older, especially teens and tweens, where family dynamics, they want the distance and space from
Yeah.
parents and things like that. And I understand that. But family may actually have a greater sense of value in the short term because it's all of a sudden this support base that you've had is now falling
That
apart.
is a fantastic point. And I will find when my mother got divorced the second time, remember I was too young the first time
Yeah.
to feel this, but when she got divorced the second time, it was just my mother and my three brothers and I in the house, almost like a sigh of relief when you're in that house. We didn't enjoy living with my stepfather.
Right.
Almost felt like you were living on eggshells. So the relief of moving into the house, even though maybe the house wasn't as nice, but it's not the house, it's the home, right? That you make together. So
Yeah.
I found it much more comfortable, even though there were a lot of disadvantages to it. We were all happier. We had much better sense of humor. The house is smaller too. We spent more time together. So I actually enjoyed it more in many ways.
Think about, and I'm not talking about a specific situation now. I'm talking about a hypothetical, which is a very realistic hypothetical.
Hmm.
You have children living in an environment, and again, it's we'll say the dad in this case, or it could be the mom, whomever, whether it's verbally abusive or worse, physically abusive, or even just substance abuse issues, whatever it happens to be,
The escaping that is on the list.
right?
Yeah.
And you're going to bed every night in fear,
Hmm.
right? Am I going to be screamed at today, or am I going to be hit, or whatever it happens to be? All of a sudden, you're removed from that situation.
You're removed from that situation, but that situation is not removed from you.
No.
That's what creates hyper vigilant kids
Yeah.
and people pleasers.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that till you're older, and that affects all your relationships. So most parents don't pick up on this because they're not psychologists. But that's some of the biggest damage you can do to your children because
Yeah.
it'll affect all their relationships. They always have to check in with, spouse, significant other, and they're asking questions like, "Are you okay?" Because of how the way they grew up.
Right.
Or they're people pleasing and doing things for other people, thinking that's going to pay off in a way where that person is never going to leave them because it's almost like they're chasing that parent their whole lives. And what's most interesting is that's actually what gets the other person to leave because almost you're pushing too hard. And it's funny because when you're people pleasing, what's the flip side of that? When you start to feel like you're doing too much work and
When
you
you
think
feel,
that the relationship isn't equal now because you're doing
oh
all
yeah,
this work trying to make someone else love you, quote unquote, what happens?
you end up pushing them away, or you end up resenting them because it's
You end up
right.
resenting
There's
them.
one or the other because
Yeah.
either they feel like this is too much, like enough already,
Yeah.
like stop with every little thing,
Hmm.
or you end up resenting them. They're just not doing enough. I'm carrying all the weight. I'm doing all this. But they're not asking you to do that,
No, they're definitely
right?
not asking you to do that, but that's your mindset.
Exactly.
Because you're almost, dating your trauma, not a person, and you're trying to resolve an issue with them. So that's, I mean, a disadvantage for kids that come from divorce too.
Yeah.
Not saying that can't happen with two parents that were together.
But I've seen many cases. I think we're seeing more and more, and I don't want to veer too much. But when you look at statistics, I think
Hmm.
it's like what, 1 in every 2 relationships
Now,
now
yeah.
end up in divorce,
Hmm.
right? When you have numbers like that, in a lot of cases, it's going to come from situations where the parents of those individuals
Hmm.
did stay together or were together.
Yeah.
Right? Times are just changing. And
Well, times are changing too, and divorce is more normalized. So when it happened to me as a kid,
yeah.
it was more rare for a kid. So there'd be a stigma attached to that. The stigma's not there as much.
And I think part of that, divorce is more normalized just the same way that once upon a time, marriage itself was the sacred institution.
Yeah.
I'm not saying marriage isn't important or isn't still valuable and doesn't have the same meaning, but not everyone feels the need or the societal pressure to get married the way once upon a time maybe was more of an expectation. So norms in general are changing in society.
I was having this disagreement with a friend of ours earlier,
Okay.
where she said that people should want to get married again. And I said, I can see this from different sides of this argument. So let's go there. And she got very heated with me, but I was okay to be in the discussion.
You mean you playing devil's advocate?
I was totally playing devil's
I've never
advocate.
seen that happen before. Yeah.
It's a talent. So in the disagreement though, she was saying, like all men should, if the woman that they're with should want to be with them if she wants to get married. I said, but how's that? There's self-love in that. Because if your views are, as an example, just saying this, let's say you've been married before and you already have kids.
Okay.
And your view is the only reason to get married is for children, right? To have that piece of paper. But you're still willing to date someone. And let's say you want to have a ceremony to celebrate that the two of you are together in front of all your families and friends, like a marriage.
Yeah.
You're just not getting the government involved.
Yeah.
Right. She disagreed with that. She said, if to keep the woman, right, the traditional woman, that, she would leave you if you didn't want to get married to her. I'm like, okay.
Okay,
And she wasn't accepting of that. She said, well, why would a man walk away from that if this woman loves him and wants to marry him? I'm like, those are his views.
Yeah.
He's entitled to his views. And if she's not accepting of that, that's one of many things she's probably not accepting of.
But the whole, going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, the whole idea of marriage, if that's all it took to keep someone, then we wouldn't see divorce at all-time highs.
Well, also, who initiates most divorces?
I don't know the stats, but I'm going to say,
I know the stat.
But I'm going to say, based on that, I'm guessing it's women.
It's women.
And I'm not blaming women. I'm
70%, and there are certain sites that are women-led sites where they question that. And they say sometimes women make decisions based on emotion.
Yeah.
And some of their reasons for getting divorced and not working on it is that they feel that they've outgrown the person that they're with.
Okay.
So again, that's a choice.
Yeah. And
they're walking away from the life, their kids, and oftentimes they regret it later.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So you can certainly find that stat. I've watched many videos on it where people have said it, but the stat is about 70% of women do walk away from marriages, and that's currently.
Wow.
So that certainly makes it more difficult. Yeah. But again, then you could go back to that if we were talking about dating, which is another episode.
Yeah.
But why would a man at that point want to get remarried and then risk again putting his kids through another divorce? Now, I can say this as someone who was divorced.
Yeah.
Then I tried another relationship, and during COVID, she was living with us for about a year. Then left, took the dog when she left. And then I waited about another 6 months and tried another relationship where we actually moved in together. Maybe not the best idea, but all the kids got along. It seemed like it was the right thing. And then my kids went through that again. How resilient do you think my kids were about that? Okay. And this is this day and age.
Yeah.
What do you think I did when my last relationship ended? What did I do with my kids? Just from what you know of me, just take a guess. Okay, I'll tell you.
I was gonna say I can see you sitting down and having a good heart to heart with them. First of all,
not even heart to heart. It was an exit interview for my kids.
I can see that.
And I said to them, I said, "Look, okay, this happened. Let's sit down and have a conversation about it." And the best part is, my kids were so open and honest about their feelings about it. My 11-year-old turned to me and goes, Dad, the way I see adults is they're just adult kids that have never grown up. And I just looked at how brilliant that was.
Yeah.
And just how he could see that. And it's like, okay, I get it. But he wasn't just talking about her. She's talking about me as well.
Yep.
And he wasn't afraid to say it. That would have never happened when I was a kid.
No.
It's like,
well, but back when
you're going to suffer through this with me, no one's going to let you have a conversation.
I was just going to say, back when we were kids, you wouldn't be asked that in the first place.
No. No. And it's not that I don't want to be my kids' friends. I love my kids. I still recognize I'm their parent.
Absolutely.
We do have fun together. But in that situation, you just look at it as like, okay, you were part of this.
Yeah.
I brought you into this. I want to know how you feel. So next time, my son also said that I'm not allowed to date without his approval. Next time he was kidding. But um, that's kind of a feeling that I'm sure a lot of kids have. It's like, we're
Absolutely.
being dragged into this with you, and you're not meaning to. You're just trying your best to move forward.
And I know with you, I can see you kind of guarding and protecting the kids up to a certain point until you introduce them. But I've seen in other situations, like every time someone comes along, introduced, introduced, introduced. What does that do to the child? Right? This the adults introduced and pulled out and introduced and ripped out and introduced and
Yeah.
I'm talking about I'm not talking about when things are
In my case, it's interesting because the last two people that I dated, I knew a long time.
Right.
One of them, the kids already knew each other. That kind of sped things up quite a
Okay.
bit, right? Just the kids alone knowing each other. Like there was no keeping everyone away from each other.
Yeah.
The other one I had known a long time, so I felt comfortable to do it. But then again, she was few and far between before COVID hit, and then she was living at the house.
Right.
But yeah, that's a big detriment. There are a lot of people that will introduce their kids to someone, and their ex never even gets to meet them, which I find is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it's a great story about divorce, but my ex-wife decided that before we left the house after we got divorced, and we were nesting, but then we decided to live together. Um, she wanted to meet my girlfriend, which I
Okay.
thought, some people would disagree with, but I thought it was an okay request. What we didn't know is that when we brought both of them over, she was dating someone at the same time, that the kids were going to come downstairs, put on our wedding video, and watch it with both of them. Okay. So
That's
I'm,
awesome.
I'm
That's
sitting there.
awesome.
I'm
Wow.
sitting there standing behind both of them, and they're like, to me, and keep in mind, chaos works for me. This is
Yeah.
this is totally normal to me, and the kids are perfectly fine with it, and they're getting to meet both people, and they're okay with it. And then I'm outside with him, like, this guy's just like me. I love him. Like,
Yeah.
by all means, date him. 'Cause he's going to be great for the kids, and she's dated him for 5 years. But it was an interesting situation. A lot of people disagree with it, but I'm looking at it going, it's like pulling a Band-Aid off. Let's
Okay.
just get this done.
But where did the disagreement from other people come from? What
The
was the
other
bone of
people just
contention?
like, that's so strange. How could you go through it? A lot of people still have contentious divorce. They don't get
Yeah.
along with the other person. We were kind of contentious at the time, but we could still compartmentalize that and just see,
What was best for the kids?
yeah. But I mean, this is going to happen regardless, right?
Yeah.
We've already probably been dating these people for a while, right? Kids didn't know because we didn't even know about what the other person was doing, even for some of that period. We were living in the same house, but it's like, now we're going to be apart. Let's try this.
But you know what I like about
And it wouldn't
that?
work for a lot of people.
No. I was gonna say what I like about that though is you got the children involved and you're upfront about everything. I've seen the flip side where it's which one's going to be dating someone first, and then the other one wants to find someone to date
Yeah.
just because they either feel left out or it's
It's not a competition.
my ex is seeing someone, so I've got to see someone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, now that's where it gets really, really unhealthy. So it's interesting in this case where people are like, I don't know if I would do that, and yet you got all these other behaviors going on
Yeah.
that people do.
Oh, the people it was worse for was the people we were dating. It's like, if I were them, I would have just said, hell no. But
Right? Yeah. That's a good that's a great litmus test.
just roll with it, I guess, right? But again,
Absolutely.
for me, coming from divorce, is like, and chaos theory.
Yeah.
How abnormal is this for me? And like, this is relatively normal for my life, so let's just do it. But again, a lot of people that wouldn't have worked for, or would have turned out really badly. But it was really funny that they were
That's
watching
an
the
awesome
wedding
story.
video. Yeah. Let's go back quickly though. Kids of divorce, benefits in the short term. They get early lessons in self-sufficiency. We covered
Yep.
that. As you said, escaping physical and emotional abuse, calmer home life. We talked about
Yep.
that. Early acceptance of life's realities.
Yes.
We did not touch on that, and being adaptable. So those last two are really important.
They're huge.
I find kids from divorce from the last era were much more adaptable. Even though as kids, I think Gen Xers were more adaptable from the next generations anyways. But I think specifically the kids from divorce in that era became the most adaptable and maladapted at the same time.
But adaptability comes from, as far as I'm concerned,
Mhm.
resiliency and being able to problem solve as well.
Yeah.
And right now, when you take away the resiliency and the independence, it's a lot harder to be adaptable because you're almost being programmed. right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the challenge that go along with that. So
Yeah. But I mean, keep in mind, when you talk about being programmed, I had a narcissistic father,
yeah,
narcissistic stepfather,
yeah,
narcissistic stepmother, which sometimes when people get divorced, they're not having that. But that is definitely something that I went through, which, forget the divorce alone. I'm still dealing with those people.
right.
Even though my house is now calmer, not the stepfather, but the father, the stepmother. So that could contribute to things after those things had already happened.
Yeah,
But definitely, I would say it will certainly make you more adaptable to different situations. Look, my kids go back and forth to 2 different houses. And some people are like, my kids are 50-50 and split up differently in the week. And I know other people have it split 1 week to the next. I'm like, why does it have to be 1 week to the next? Split it up during the week so the parent gets a break. I don't know how much that affects the kids having to go back and forth. My kids don't seem to mind it. And you FaceTime now. My kids message me all the
all
time.
the
Or,
time.
I have my kid on days that aren't mine and I'm taking him to his hockey games because my ex is working. So, and we agreed on that before I did it. But those aren't my days, but I'm still spending more time with them than I normally would during certain seasons.
But that goes back to being amicable.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to weird concept, but putting the kids first,
Yeah.
right? So you put all the other shit aside to put your kids first.
Yeah.
That's key. And again, if you have parents who are more self-aware, and I would even say have done some work,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we know people may grow apart or there might be other issues and everything else. But if, again, you have people who are self-aware,
Yeah.
that then translates to calmer, safer home environments.
Mm-hmm.
And the children may not mind going back and forth as much because it's both home environments are safe
safe.
and they're fun and they know they're loved there.
And they're safe with either parent.
Yeah.
They don't feel they need to escape one parent to go to the other. So yeah, they do float back and forth. And COVID helped with that too,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Absolutely.
We don't have that much time left, but let's just talk about long-term effects of divorce.
Okay.
This is to sum up because we've been discussing it as we've been going through.
Yep.
We talked about attachment theory. So you get a lot of anxious or avoidant attachment styles
Yep.
based on kids from divorce. Sometimes poor conflict resolution, where they never learned from watching parents how to argue properly, where you should be able to resolve the issues and both be happy with it, as opposed to, one person trying to fight and win each time. So there's that. They have abandonment issues. I have my fair share. Which includes codependency versus, and there's toxic self-sufficiency too,
Okay.
where more avoidance would have that,
Right.
whereas codependence, anxious people would have that. There's mistrust, low self-esteem, confidence, risk of repeating patterns of their parents, as I said before,
Yep.
relationship issues and patterns, as I said, and we're going to post whatever stats we have on that. So people, if they want to learn more about this, they can go and see it.
On Facebook, post it on Facebook for now, or
No, we can
no?
post it under the YouTube video too in the
Okay.
chat, and we can post it everywhere in the chat so
Okay.
people can always have access to
Perfect.
it.
Perfect.
Now, the main part of what we were talking about is there a difference? Are kids of divorce more resilient? Your thoughts would have been?
I can see them being more resilient. I can definitely see them being more resilient.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I know how people take a look and, oh no, no possibility. Because again, generalizations and people take a certain point of view.
Yeah.
I can see where it allows for certain skill development, certain characteristics to be developed, certain personality traits, which can allow them to thrive. But again, with safe enough, comfortable enough environments.
Okay. So what if I told you
Yeah.
that it took me a while to find a study that would back it up,
Okay.
but there is from slate.com, it's from 2022, article titled Divorce Bad for Kids? The History of It. Again, I'll post this for people. There is a specific quote in here after them going through about 18 pages of saying back and forth, they've never really been able to come to a consensus on this.
Yeah.
So, but they kind of came to a consensus in their study, which said, and here's the quote: humans underestimate resilience thanks to a bias dubbed immune neglect. In reality, researchers have concluded that most children touched by divorce are ultimately well-adjusted, indistinguishable from their peers raised in nuclear families.
Not surprised. And it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning,
Mhm.
right? Look at all the factors. people who stay together? Is it a safe home environment, right? Is there constant battles going on? Are there other factors?
How
So
many people whose parents are together have wished that their parents would have gotten divorced?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I say when you get these studies and everything else,
Hmm.
I would love to be able to dig deeper and what's the background. Let's do a study where we look at it's amicable. Let's do a study where one parent
Yeah.
is the parent and has done the work, and one parent is toxic. Let's do a study where both parents are toxic,
Yeah.
and then start to give me those stats and everything
Well,
else.
didn't you give me a stat? We were talking about secure attachment. It was quoted as 50%, and you
Yeah,
said that's actually changed to 20% now.
something like that. It's definitely on the decrease,
Yeah.
right? It's definitely on the
So
decrease.
the world is changing in an interesting way, but I found this very interesting because I would have said, that professionals would have said the kids were at a disadvantage. But
Yeah,
again, there were so many things that affected that: socioeconomic status, extended family, all
those
these
things.
different things. It
Yeah,
wasn't just the parents, it wasn't just the kids. So in reality,
yeah.
no one knows.
I'm not surprised.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot and wrapping up.
Okay.
If you were to share one message, I'll say for parents who are separated going through divorce, one takeaway for people listening, okay? Or parents who are divorced, okay?
Yeah.
What one message would you share with those individuals that you feel is important for the development of their children? What's one takeaway from
In
this?
divorce,
Yeah. So through the divorce, what's one message that is important that can benefit this, the
do
children?
not try to poison your kids against your ex.
Love it.
It'll backfire greatly.
Yeah.
That is my number one piece of advice.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
All right.
Hey,
Al?
Adam, thank you. I appreciate, you know what? I mean, this was a very, I know, personal topic for you. So I appreciate the vulnerability on this and the rawness. I really appreciate it. I know I learned a little bit even today, and I know you quite well. I learned
Well,
some things I didn't know.
it's always helpful to have a former school principal on the other side. So,
But no, I really appreciate it. So great topic, and be interesting to see what we have lined up next. I know that our list is in terms of what we're going through. So
let's go a little less heavy next time.
exactly. So stay tuned and see what we're going to talk about next time.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks. Take care.